Hi, and welcome to the training session about how you can use your safe work method statements in your business. We'll be going through the following. What is a safe work method statement, or what's often called a SWMS? When is it advisable to have a SWMS? And that's a bit different to when is it actually required legally for you to have a SWMS? And then how do you use it and what's actually included in your SWMS? This will take probably about 15 minutes, nothing much more, to go through. So Safe Work Method Statement, it's actually a document that you use to manage your work health and safety in your workplace or on your various workplaces that you go to. It is a legal requirement for high-risk work, high-risk construction activities to be specific. However, once you've got SWMS in place, or if you like to actually manage your risk in your workplace, a SWMS is good for any work that has some level of risk involved. So it's not just for high risk. So what a SWMS does is actually identify potential hazards associated with the work that is going to be done, and then puts in place specific control measures to minimise those risks. So it's not really a procedure, though it does go through the steps in using a tool, let's say an electric drill or something like that. And it does help people confirm the steps in place and what you need to do in order to remain safe. It is written from the perspective of the user and what they'll actually have to do. So it helps any business be proactive in minimising the harm that could actually occur. And what you also are going to get as a benefit of using Safe Work Method statements is some consistency and minimum standards for when staff are using a particular tool or a particular procedure that could be dangerous. So it gives a really clear framework for managing a risk activity of some sort. And you will find that Safe Work Method statements follow a template, and they're pretty well standard now across Australia, and you'll see that with a lot of safety procedures and tools, etc., are now getting to be actually much more uniform. If you have got an old Safe Work Method statement, you really should check into making sure it's current, because the minimum standards for what's included in a Safe Work Method statement have increased dramatically over the years. So let's dive in a bit further. So it's advisable to have a SWMS whenever there are physical risks or chemical hazards, biological hazards as well, electrical hazards, or mechanical hazards. So it's all designed to look at, well, what are the hazards in place? And there may be multiple in place, if you like, multiple hazards for the one particular procedure or piece of equipment that you might be using, plant, machinery, etc. So, and what you would do is identify those hazards, and they may not actually be applicable to every circumstance for the use, let's say, of that electric drill, but it should be covered in your SWMS so that if that hazard is present, that you've got the risk control procedures put in place there for people to follow. And what has happened from my experience is if an incident should occur in a workplace, one of the first things WorkSafe does request is a copy of a Safe Work Method statement. So whilst you might not need it in a cafe, for instance, I particularly know incidences that have occurred in a cafe and they have asked for SWMS when they start to do their investigation into what has occurred. So they're a very practical thing to actually put in place for a business anyway, and then they're actually a matter of compliance as well. So, speaking of compliance, you're really talking about when things are legally required. So when do you actually need to have a safe work method statement? So there is high risk construction work, and you'll see here the HRCW, and that actually means that a safe work method statement is required under the regulations for all of these tasks. So when a person is working more than 2 metres above the ground, where they could fall. It's actually not 2 metres above the ground, it's 2 metres where they could fall. If they're working on a telecommunication tower, if there's demolition of structures that are load bearing or otherwise related to the physical integrity or physical strength, you might say, of a structure. If there's work that's involving disturbance of asbestos, working where there's structural alterations or repairs that have been done or being done that require some sort of temporary support. You can imagine the dangers there. Work carried out or near a confined space, and they've got their own particular risk confined spaces. If the work is being carried out near a shaft or trench that's deeper than 1.5 metres, or if it's been the work is being carried out in the trench or that tunnel. If work is being carried out near or with chemicals, fuel or refrigerant lines, that is something that you need to have a safe work method statement for. And lastly on the list on this page only, I have to say, any work that's carried out on or near energised electrical installations or services. Obviously big risk environments, each of these. Going on from that, we also have work that's carried out in an area that may be contaminated or flammable atmosphere, or if there's work being done that involve tilt-up or precast concrete, so those big slabs, work on or in or adjacent to a road, railway, shipping lane, or other traffic corridors used by traffic other than pedestrians. You can imagine there the risks as well. Work that's done in an area where there are artificial extremes of temperature. So that could be it could be storage facilities quite easily. Work that's carried out in, over or adjacent to water or other liquids where there is a risk of drowning. Work involving diving. Work involving a risk of being hit by moving plant and equipment there. Work involving the use of explosives. Work involving a risk of being exposed to the release of stored energy, your hydraulic pressure or electrical energy. And lastly on the list here is work in an area where there is movement of powered mobile plant. So that could be in a warehouse, and that powered mobile plant may well be forklifts, etc., or moving, something that's actually moving. So under these 19 areas, the safe work method statement is not a choice, it's something that you need to have in place. But as I mentioned before, they're very useful to have as a standard tool, full stop. So especially in the trades, but where there is any risk, full stop. That's what you'd want to be looking at, having a safe work method statement. So it could be for welding, it could be dealing with hot water, steam, any power tools, could be some hand tools, could be machinery of any sort, anything that's got moving parts, pinch points, those sorts of things. I'm thinking maybe even in outside environments, farming equipment, all sorts of scenarios actually come to mind. So how do we actually use safe work method statements? So what you need to do is actually look at the contents or devise the contents. We do have safe work method statements, and take the workers through the background information and the risks and the control measures, and ask them for how do they use and protect themselves and others from risk and injury. So really what we're talking about here is some sort of consultation with staff, because you need to actually confirm what they currently do and evaluate that for if it is the safest method. So each week a worker who is actually using any of the machinery or conducting the tasks that have some sort of risk with it should read and then be trained to understand the key content of the SWMS. Now, not everybody can read those, so you might actually need to help someone go through that. And sometimes a short little video or something else like that might be used, but they need to sign off on that SWMS that they have understood the Safe Work Methods statement before they've undertaken any tasks. So you can see that Safe Work Methods statements could well be part of, and should be part of if they exist, your induction for any staff. What we need to also look at then is if there is any particular risk situations when a staff is undertaking some work, and it might be a particular project, it might be something off centre that they maybe don't do all the time. So we need to just really look at the SWMS and see if it's got all of the relevant risk controls in the document itself, or if we actually need to adapt and maybe include other risk controls to make sure that the risks are mitigated, so that the risks are eliminated where possible or reduced otherwise. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about risks in a minute, and we'll go through that they are actually scaled. So to be of value, that SWMS that you've maybe bought or created or whatever, that needs to be current and updated, and staff need to be current and updated on the content in a SWMS. So they're not a document that you just create and put on the shelf and don't touch for years on end. You really do need to take your staff through it on a regular basis, and quite often this can be done on a rolling basis through toolbox meetings or some such thing. If an incident does occur, and they do occur, people are people, and not always has everything been considered in a SWMS, or maybe some sort of practices have not been followed. We need to then go back and look at, well, where did the process and the steps in the SWMS and the controls, where was a gap? And then look at retraining or revising the SWMS at that point. So if something does occur, a near miss or an incident, it's actually time to go back to your SWMS and fix that up. So SWMS, what do they actually look like? They are a document that's fairly heavy with details, and a lot of the first few pages of a SWMS will be standard in terms of the content requirements. It won't be standard in terms of the content you put in it. They do have to have your particular company name, your ABN, your address, etc. And it could even, in fact, be the address of a particular project as well. You might be rolling through several projects at different locations. So it'll have in there what the activity is, the key activity for this particular SWMS, as I mentioned, the location, etc. Who's actually responsible for monitoring the activity? And you can see here we've got use of hand tools, and that's knives and cleavers. So who would actually be responsible for that in a particular, they've got a butcher shop in this example. What are the legislation and codes of practice, standards, etc. that have been consulted in the development of the SWMS? And you can see here we've got some listed when we've created a SWMS. And any particular plant and equipment that's required in order to do the work activity, and as the example is here of use of hand tools. So I don't actually think there's plant and equipment that's required for that. Maintenance checks and also whether a safety data sheet is actually required for any of the chemicals. So that's really on page 1, and you can see there's already quite a few details in that. Moving on to page 2, and again this is standard. The personnel qualifications required for the activity, so you don't just let someone perhaps use these sharp knives that we were talking about here, cleavers, etc. Maybe they have to have a certificate 3 in butchery before they do that. So whatever that is, you might not need that for using a drill or some other activity. So it may or may not be relevant, that personnel qualification, but just think about that carefully. The details of anyone who was consulted in the development of the SWMS, you do want to consult with as wide a team as possible, but at least you need a couple of people. So who's responsible also for updating the SWMS? And then all of those areas of high risk work there are identified, and you need to tick which ones to apply. And it could be something that's other, and you'll see here that we've got that here with other sharp blades. Okay, so that's page 2, and that is standard again, as I said. Moving on to page 3. Page 3 is actually a table, and it's got the risk assessment tables on it. So I'm going to jump to that because this is just words here. It's better for you to actually see. So what you've got is the different steps you'd go through. Step 1 is really looking at the impact or the consequences of what would happen if something went wrong. And so for each part of the tasks that you're going to have details about and the controls, you will have the consequences of what could go wrong. So it could be something that's negligible. Right down here you can see here, negligible first aid treatment, righto, okay, right up to a fatal incident at 5. Okay, so this is scored. You'll see here it's scored. Then on the other side, you've got the probability of something actually happening. And there are descriptors in both of these tables for you to look at and make a decision on. And it's more than likely not going to be such a critical thing if you're looking between, I don't know, negligible and minor. So don't sweat too much on that, but you really do have to think about what would perhaps somebody who's unskilled, who hasn't read the SWMS, who just dived in and done something quickly, maybe it's a stressful time, you know, think of some of the worst scenarios that could happen, because I'm afraid they do happen. So after you've looked at all the consequences, you'd then be looking at the probability. So probability goes from that it could rarely occur right up to that it's almost certain that it's going to occur. Now you overlay these things into step 3, into the risk levels for the particular components, tasks, etc. that we're going to detail in the SWMS. So you can see here if it's almost certain and the impact and consequence is substantial, well, that's going to have a higher rating there of 25. You can't go any higher. So you can see here that there is a red zone, orange zone, moving through to well, light orange, and then through to you know, gold and pale yellow. The areas that are in the red and the 2 oranges, you would definitely be looking at some sort of control very, very quickly for any of those. So it does make sense, and actually the risk assessment tool for anything is actually very, very handy. So you'll see here the words to hierarchy of control. So the highest level of control really is to eliminate something. If you can avoid the scenario from happening full stop, that's what you would be doing. And then you go down to substitute, where maybe you can't eliminate it. So maybe you could substitute, I don't know, a chemical or something else like that with something that's not quite so dangerous. Or you could have engineering, where you've actually put in some sort of if we talk about chemicals again, maybe some sort of cover over a machine or something else like that. So it's quite a practical, physical sort of thing there. Administration is maybe rules and regulations, maybe that if we go back to chemicals, that only people with qualifications can use the chemical, or that they must only be doing the task for 15 minutes, or, those are the sort of rules that you can put in place. And after that, you've got, finally, as the last protocol really, is personal protective equipment, and that could be clothing or a whole range of other things. So there's personal protective equipment. So, and you can see here that when you've got scores from 11 to 25, it's pretty unacceptable that there's nothing in place. So you do need to have some SWMS in place and a whole lot of other controls. So 7 to 10 is really about with some strict controls, or for short durations, things can occur, and tasks can occur, and really when a risk is scaled as 1 to 6, that's seen as fairly sensible. So you can see that on our risk assessment chart on the right here is from moderate, so the gold colour and the light yellow colours. Everything else really needs much more strict control measures to be put in place. And really what we're doing with SWMS is we're helping someone go home at the end of the day without injuries. And that's the major thing that we're looking at. So page 4, what we're actually starting off here really is with the key content now for the particular task that we're looking at. And so you'll see here on the left-hand side all the headings of setting up really for the job, and then the potential risks that are there. And then we go into what risk ratings, and so we've got the consequence and the probability and then the risk rating. That on this left side here, that is how it is, if you like, just naturally. Then we've got the control measures that we put in place, and you'll notice the numbers are back here again. So now the numbers, the consequence is still the same, but we've limited the probability. So instead of having a score of 15, which put us in the high level, we're now at a score of 5, which is now we've taken it down to the lower level or acceptable level. Notice here too that the person responsible to make sure that this component, just for example, planning and preparation, is actually managed and these control measures are put in place. So this person here has culpability for supervision and for provision of equipment, or like it could be PPE. As you can see here, it says PPE. Yeah, rightio. So what you've got then is the going back to the left-hand side here, and we'll have a couple of pages of this in most SWMS, all of the different steps, and everybody needs to plan and prepare. So what does that actually look like for, I don't know, using your electric drill, or using some chemicals, or as we had in the SWMS before, using sharp knives. So it may include, and then it's got here, if you like, moving tools. It could actually be assembling your tools or inspection of your tools. And we would go through all of the steps from start to finish in using the sharp knives or the chemical or whatever we're talking about for this particular SWMS. Right, okay. So it may be a couple of pages long, it may be 2 pages, it may be something fairly simple. But the big thing here is to really look at what these scores are and what the controls are and how we've managed to bring that down. And this is why we want people to actually read this and understand this, the controls, because we've gone from, if you like here, injuries from loose handles, we've gone from a risk rating of 9, which is still not good, right down to 3. So how good is that? That's what we want. So people aren't injured, aren't prevented from doing their work because they are injured, or aren't prevented from enjoying other parts of their life. Let's be real. Rightio. So moving on. So this is your last page in the SWMS, and as I said, they really vary in length according to the complexities of a job. But the last page is really quite critical, and that everybody who is using a particular tool or process, chemicals, etc., that they go through the SWMS, understand it, and that they sign off on it. So you can see here their name, the qualification required for the activity could be nil. They've signed it, the date is there, the time is there, and if there is any high-risk license or something else that might be required. And so you would do this every time you take that person through a SWMS. And that might be on a regular basis. As I mentioned, I'm thinking about a manufacturing business. Okay, things largely stay the same, but I would be taking people through this on a regular basis. And then I would be doing this at least once a year, if not more. I'd be using toolboxes to actually introduce a SWM. Toolbox meetings, I'm talking about every meeting. So you can just quickly verify it and update it if you need to. And it's also a very good training tool at that particular time, even though it's not just created for that. So that brings us to the end of using your SWMS in your business. If you've got any questions, you can always give me a call. You can always give me an email. Very happy to answer any questions on SWMS. We do have a range of safe work method statements available. What we do is tailor our SWMS to your particular circumstances, but you might want to just go and write yours from scratch. It's up to you. You might want us to verify what you've written. It's pretty hard, though, to actually just start with a blank page, and it can take quite a deal of time. So therefore, it's actually very useful to start with something and then verify that and then use that for your particular business. So that's why we have got SWMS available right now for purchase on our website. Thank you very much for your time. Bye-bye.